if 50 is the new 30, but I do know that I'm in my 50s now, and I love it. I also know that I didn't become who I am through dumb luck. I did it by listening to God's voice, knowing myself, and using all of that knowledge to create the life I wanted. You see, I absolutely believe that in order for a woman to experience happiness, fulfillment, and peace, she needs to know two things. They're not quite the same thing. The first one has to do with the reality of your life, and the second one has to do with your purpose for being in this world, which is something each of us has to discover for herself and cannot be dictated by any other person in our lives, not by our husbands, parents, children, employers, or friends. I think it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference between who we are and who we're meant to be. So much of the time we lose ourselves just trying to keep up with the frantic pace of life. We drag ourselves out of bed in the morning, already a half hour behind, and spend much of the day responding to the needs and demands of others. Somewhere along the line, we often lose track of the essential feminine self, that unique, life-giving entity that invigorates our beings and warms the souls of the people we love. But we don't have to lose that feminine self, and the way to hold on to her is to accept nothing less than simply the best we can be in the roles we choose for ourselves: wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. And when it comes to mothers, there's something I want to say. Whether you stay at home with your children or work a job and then come home to your children, the point is, you're still a full-time mother, and beyond that, a woman. We were women long before we were mothers, and will be women long after our children leave the nest. I believe we were put on this earth to enjoy lives of joy and abundance, and that is what I want for you and for me. I want you to get excited about whatever phase of life you're in, excited about being a woman in this day and time, excited about being the woman that God created you to be. And it's all there for the choosing, because I believe in the core of my soul that how you live, how I live, how we all live as women is largely a matter of choice. We have the right to choose to be happy. We have the right to choose to have a good attitude. It's all a choice. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to use that word a lot in this book because choice is very important to me. A lot of women hear me say this, and I imagine a lot of them may think, that's easy for you to say. You live in a wonderful house with a successful man who loves you, and you can probably have anything you want. You're a privileged person. And all of that is true. But do you know what the real privilege is? The real privilege is being free to embrace the joyful aspects of life and reject the hurtful ones. To choose to do what's working and to turn your back on what isn't. It's a privilege to have the right to take charge of your existence and be excited about your life. You don't need a lot of costly stuff to be happy. Our first apartment was a whopping 420 square feet of linoleum and worn nylon pile, and I used to drive a 1962 Comet with bright turquoise paint that looked as if it had been brushed on. I lived the first 48 years of my life in the heartland of this country, and when I was a kid, the only spoons I had in my mouth were stainless steel, not silver. Still, I always felt fortunate to be who I was and excited by the prospect of what life held for me. I chose to make my husband and my children the center of my life, and I've never regretted that for a moment, not one single second. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew I was put on this earth to be a wife and mother, and that's exactly what I chose to do. And it is through the integrity of that choice that I have created the life I longed for and never had when I was a child. I grew up in Oklahoma with 3 older sisters, a twin brother, and parents who loved us with all their hearts. They were also crazy about each other, which went a long way toward teaching us kids how a man and a woman could live together in a small house, raise 5 children, and still get along. We never had enough money to buy everything we wanted or needed, yet we always thought of ourselves as loved rather than deprived. My father was a binge-drinking alcoholic and an addicted gambler. Because of that, I lived every day in uncertainty. I woke up every morning thinking, did Daddy come home last night? And if he hadn't, is this the day he'll come home? Or if he had been around consistently for a while, I'd wonder, is this the day this man I love so much will start drinking and gambling again? How long will this binge last? Will there be enough money to buy food? Will the electric company cut off the lights again this month? How long will it be before he's back at work during the day and comes home at night and acts like my dad again? I knew he was a good and wonderful man, and I loved him with all my heart. I also knew he had an illness that cheated my sisters, my brother, and me out of the father we yearned for. When I was just a little girl, I wanted more than anything to make my father well. But because I couldn't do that, I decided that I would dedicate my life to undoing the legacy of doubt, pain, fear, and uncertainty that accompanied his great love for us. I forgave him even then, when I was little, but the fear never left. So when I grew up, my plan was to fall in love, get married, and start my own family. And I decided then and there that I would not bring that part of my father's legacy into my adult life. I would never marry a man or even date a man who drank or gambled. I can remember making a conscious choice and telling myself, I adore my father and I am going to bring every good part of his legacy into my life and live it and embrace it in my husband and in my children. But I will not allow that part of his legacy into my adult life. If my father had a powerful influence on me, so did the extraordinary woman who was my mother. To put it simply, my mother lived for her children. She always put herself last. If there wasn't quite enough food for dinner, she was the one who didn't get a full plate. She'd often be up well past midnight, scrubbing the bathroom floor or ironing my father's shirts or sitting hunched over her sewing machine, making me a skirt or a blouse out of remnants she'd gotten on sale. And then there were the nights she'd drive around town with me or one of my siblings in the car looking for my father, who hadn't been home in a couple of days. We'd drive slowly with the windows rolled down, peering down side streets to see if my father was lying unconscious in a deserted parking lot or dead in an alleyway. We went out on a number of those gloomy excursions, but we never would find him. She'd always drive home tired but grimly optimistic that he'd turn up alive and relatively well before too long. That precious woman never put herself first. She also never took care of herself, which is why she died of a catastrophic heart attack at the age of 58, just 6 years older than I am now. I was married and the mother of a 6-year-old son when she died, and I swore to myself that day that I would never allow myself to become so drained and depleted. I loved my mother, and I have carried her legacy of love and devotion into my relationship with my children. But I have also chosen to reject the legacy of self-neglect that caused her to be taken from me when I still needed her so much. That is why I eat healthy food, exercise every day, and make sure I take care of myself so my body doesn't fall apart before it has to. That's exactly what my mother would have wanted for me, even if she didn't do it for herself. I truly believe that I can best honor my mother's memory by not perpetuating her legacy, but by choosing the parts of it that are right for me and losing the ones that aren't. The concept of redefining your legacy is something I am passionate about, especially when it comes to women, many of whom are merely existing inside lives they neither chose nor contemplated. So many of us have dutifully reproduced our mother's or father's behaviors, duplicating our parents' patterns and manifesting a legacy that we, however unconsciously, feel obligated to fulfill. I want you to know you have a choice. You do not have to haul your parents' legacy into your life like that old dining room set your great aunt left you in her will. If it makes you happy to eat at that table and sit in those chairs, by all means keep them. But if it doesn't, remember, you have options. You can hold on to the table and toss the chairs, or lose the table and keep the chairs, perhaps reupholster the seats so they're more comfortable. And if you just plain hate the whole thing, get rid of it before you ever bring it into the house. Just as your great aunt's furniture might not suit your dining room, your parents' way of living might not suit your life. You're not insulting your dead aunt by rejecting her old furniture, and you're not betraying your parents by living your life differently than they lived theirs. In fact, what you're doing is being true to yourself. I believe in the core of my being that you don't have to bring into your life anything that isn't working for you, nor are you fated to live out a future you had no part in creating. Each of us possesses the will to create our own legacy. It's all a choice. Writing this book has required me to think about the choices I've made, and it has made me aware of the exhilarating power of living a life of my own choosing. I don't know how it happened, but as far back as I can remember, I've always known my life had a purpose, and I have pursued that purpose with a passion. I have never thought of myself as a victim of circumstance. Rather, I examined the circumstances I was in, evaluated their usefulness in my life, and used them as a blueprint for how I would build the life I wanted. I've always pictured myself as the one person and the only force besides God who I could count on to design the life I wanted to live and make it a reality. I knew I was meant to be a wife and mother, and I made it happen. I wanted a husband who didn't drink or gamble, and I made it happen. I wanted to take care of myself to remain vibrant and healthy for my family, and I made it happen. Although I confess that the day I get rid of that treadmill just might be the happiest day of my life. And everything that has happened is the result of conscious choices that I made, some of which, I must tell you, were difficult to make and scary to live with. The bottom line, though, was the thought of living a life I didn't want was much, much scarier than taking responsibility for choosing to create the life I did want.